Welcome to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, where we equip pastors to take their churches from declining to thriving by pointing them to a new future and a new hope. Join us weekly for encouragement and practical advice in your pastoring journey.
Well, thank you, Dan. This is called Revitalize and Replant, and we're all over the board, right? I'm here with JimBo Stewart. Say hey, JimBo.
Glad to be here.
All right, and I'm here with Mark Hallock.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, JimBo's filling in for Dan. Now, JimBo does not have Dan's pipes.
I do not.
He does not. But he works cheap, so we're glad JimBo. Actually, he's here. We're at the Southern.
I'm like the Great Value brand.
That's right. We're at the Southern Baptist Convention. I know as you're listening to this, that happened months ago or weeks ago, but we're here recording these podcasts live because Mark and I are committed to recording face-to-face, not over the interstate or over the internet, but face-to-face.
Every single podcast episode we've ever done
has been face-to-face.
Face-to-face.
I kind of want to see one interstate.
And we just, that's what I always call that. My kids, I bought that on the interstate. I say it's the internet. I just do it to entertain them. Anyway, I don't know. Anyhow, but JimBo's here for the Southern Baptist Convention, so we brought him in
we
here.
We love JimBo, man.
And so we got a place at this table for you. So just pull up your chair.
That's right.
And join us at this little table at the Southern Baptist Convention, and just you can just watch all the strange pastors walk by as they go by, and we try to figure out which one's a pastor, which one's a youth leader, which one's a denominational leader, and which one's a music leader.
In the airport on the way, I always like to see if I can spot all the pastors.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's not hard. We're pretty
khaki country is what I call it.
Khaki country.
Khaki country.
Man, more khakis than you've ever seen in your life.
All right. Anyway, this program is called Revitalize.
Revitalize and Replant.
So even though we talk about a lot of things on this, because we have 10 episodes a month, we are going to talk about revitalization today. So there you go. So this comes from our friend, Dr. Thom Rainer. That's Tom, Thom, like Tom Thumb.
Have you ever asked him, by the way, about why that spelling? Like, where did that come from?
No, but I will. I should do that.
I guarantee people wonder that. Thom.
Well, I think Tom Thumb was Thom.
Thom?
I think so, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, but Dr. Thom, Thom Rainer, and we're grateful for this wonderful content he's provided for us today. And we're going to share this wonderful list of 8 things any church who wants to be engaged in revitalization must do. Are you ready? 8 things.
Let's do it.
This came from the home office in Wahoo, Nebraska. The top 8 things a church has to do in order to be revitalized. Are you ready? Number 8. They have to what?
Are we going 8?
Yeah,
to 1?
All right,
we're gonna go backwards. We're gonna start with 8 and go to number 1, like a countdown.
No, I don't think we can.
Okay.
I think it starts with 1.
All right.
But we'll call it 8.
We'll call it 8.
Okay, here we go. Ready?
Right,
Number 8.
Number 8 is
okay. It's an admission of a problem and a need. That's number 8.
You know how many times churches do not admit there's a problem?
Yes.
I mean, I drove 4 hours one Wednesday to a church out in the middle of nowhere, literally, and I was glad to do it. They said they had read my book, and not that many people have ever read that book. So if you tell me you read my book, I'll drive 4 hours. So I drove 4 hours out there. I walk in, and there were 6 people in a circle up at the front of the sanctuary in chairs, and I walked up there, and I said, hey, I'm Mark. Yeah, I know, we read your book. It's great. I said, well, tell me about your church. They said, well, this is all of us, 6. I said, what about Sunday? No, 6 is all we have. We don't have a pastor, just the 6 of us.
This is it.
And it's in a neighborhood, and the church was built in the 1980s, so it's not a really old church. And he said, we think, you've got some things that can help us. And I said, great. But he said, before you start, you need to know we're not one of those dead churches that need to be replanted. So I thought I could just get in my car and drive another 4 hours.
Are you serious?
Home. Yeah, I'm dead serious.
Oh, wow.
So
Dead serious.
A total denial that we even have a real problem.
Yeah.
Their only problem was they didn't have the right pastor. And if I could help them find the right pastor,
that was the answer.
That would be the answer.
Yeah.
They weren't the problem. It was that the last pastor they'd had dropped them down to this place, and they refused to recognize the problems they had in their church. So number 1,
Number 8.
Number 8. We're going backwards.
Number 8.
This is not going to go well.
No, I know. I'll try to keep us on track.
Okay, number 8.
Okay.
Going from bottom to top. You've got to admit that you have a need.
Which leads to number 7.
Number 7 is
humility. There has to be a heart of humility, a spirit of humility amongst the folks who are still there.
Why?
JimBo, why would you say that?
Well, I mean, members and leaders don't think that they have to know that they don't have all the answers. And part of this is being willing to receive outside help.
And be teachable.
Humility and teachability really are the two correlating factors, if you look at the book of Proverbs, to wisdom and foolishness. The level of amount of humility and teachability you have that tells me exactly where you're at on whether you're wise or foolish.
Having done church consultations for decades, sometimes it's the third time around. Every 2 years I go back, and finally on the third time after 6 years, they go, I think we're ready to listen now. I mean, the other 2 times they listened, but they weren't going to act on it because I didn't really have that much to teach them. They weren't as bad as I said they might be. And so the humility comes, as you said, when they are more teachable. And in order to be revitalized, you have to be teachable. So number 6 is what?
Number 6 is a willingness to do things differently, sometimes radically differently.
Yes, and Dr. Rainer says this trait acknowledges the church can't continue to do things the way they've done. He actually said, I recently spoke to a group that had dwindled to about 20. Their primary concern was the possibility that some of the screens might be used instead of a hymnal. I mean, we've all been down that road. They've got bigger issues than do we sing out of a hymnal or off of a screen if you used to be 200 and now you're 20. But they will make those kinds of things deal breakers. We're not going to do this if we have to do that. And an unwillingness to change anything or even to make some significant changes is a real problem when it comes to revitalization.
And I would say two things you're trying to get at there. When you see a church that is unwilling, one, who truly has authority in this church?
Right.
And this is where it's tied to humility. But is Jesus really the Lord of this church? And therefore is his word the authority? Because what he tells us in Matthew, in the Great Commission, right before in verse 18, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me.
Yep.
And to me, that's like step one, is Jesus. And here's the deal. If Jesus is the Lord of this church, which means this is his church, not my church, then guess what? My preferences, they're not bad, but they submit to the authority of Christ.
Yeah, one of the most famous lines we use from Richard Blackaby all the time is that the last thing this church needs is your unprayed over opinion. Yeah. And so what you really want or what I want doesn't matter because this church doesn't belong to us. We didn't buy it with our blood, and it's not our bride. I do think when you look at this, and he says a willingness to do radically different things. Again, all 3 of us have worked with dying churches, and all 3 of us knows many of them, when you first talk to them, they're willing to make some changes, but they'll tell you what the deal breakers are.
Right. Yeah.
We're not willing to do these things. Right. And you've got to say, you would rather die than change this? And some of them get to the place, yes, they would. Yeah. So there has to be that willingness to do things differently, sometimes radically differently.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the passages I'll often take church to in that conversation is in Joshua chapter 5. Joshua they've crossed the Jordan River, and they've had Passover on the promised land, and now Joshua is surveying Jericho, and he comes across this man with a sword drawn, and the first question he asks is the wrong question. The first question he asks is, are you for us or are you against us? Now, the only reason he asked the first question wrong is because he doesn't recognize who he's talking to. And then the answer is, it wasn't a yes or no question, but the answer back is no. But I am the commander of the Lord's army. Then when Joshua recognizes who he's talking to, he actually asks the right question. Wow. And then he goes, what would you have me do, Lord? Yeah. And so what I'll tell the churches is, listen, I'm not here to tell you exactly what your next step is or that we've got to get rid of this non-negotiable or change this or change your name. What I'm asking you we can't ask that. We can't come to the Lord and bring that to his feet. He's the Lord. He is the commander of this church. This is his church. And we can't come to him and go, hey, are you for this or are you against this? Wow. Yeah. That's the wrong question. Yeah. The right question has to be, what would you have us do, Lord?
Yeah.
That's so good, man.
All right, we're talking about 8 things every church needs to do in revitalization. We're going in reverse order. Number 8, admit you have a need. Number 7, exhibit humility. Number 6, have a willingness to do things differently, sometimes radically differently. And number 5, go ahead.
New leadership or renewed leadership.
How many times am I asked, can the same pastor that was leading this church for 20 years into its decline, can he be the one that can bring it out? In fact, on more than one occasion, ladies and gentlemen, I have been in a deacons meeting or an elders meeting with the pastor and the deacons or the elders, and they ask me that question with him in the room.
Right there in front of him.
Right there in front of him. In
How
fact,
do you answer
well,
that?
one time I went to a church. I thought it was just a meeting with the deacons. This church called me and said, they called the director of missions who called me, and we went together. And the church said, we want, I thought it was the deacons. The deacons would like to meet with you. We've got some issues with our church. It's about to close probably, and we need some help. Okay, fine. So I show up like on a Tuesday night, and I get there, and the parking lot's full. This church is in decline. So I was thinking, is there a wedding or a funeral? I mean, the parking lot's full. I walk in, and the church has a lot of people in it. And one of the chairmen of the deacons meets me at the back, and he says, we're glad you're here. You've got 30 minutes to share with our church the struggles of replanting, and then we're going to have a question and answer whether we're ready or not. I thought, well, that's not what I expected, but okay. So I get up front, and, I do my deal. And so I do my dog and pony show, and I talk about why churches die and how they can come back. And the pastor's on the front row. And so then we have a time for questions. And the first question by the chairman of the deacons is, our pastor's been here for 20 years, and the church has been declining the whole time he's here. Is there any reason to believe he could turn this thing around? He's on the front row.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, I know. So
That's a nightmare situation.
I said, well, I think your director of missions is here. And why don't you come up, Rodney, and answer? No, I didn't say that. What I said was kind of what Rainer says here. You know what? The same man can't do it, but maybe if he was a different pastor. I'm saying, excuse me, let me change that.
New or renewed.
New or renewed. Here's what I'm saying. The same man could do it, but he couldn't be the same pastor.
Yeah.
Let me repeat that.
Yeah.
The same man could do it, but he can't be pastoring the way he's been pastoring.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the reality of it is, it doesn't appear that God gifted many of us to make that kind of a pivot and make that kind of a change. And so most of the time, God chooses to use a new person in that role, not the person who's been there. And the role of that person who's been there is incredibly important because he's the one to help pass it off to the new person.
That's right.
And so that's generally and that's how I answered that.
Yeah.
And afterward, the pastor came up and said, I think you just took my income and my family's income away. And I said, I didn't mean to do that, but I answered honestly. Sometimes this job's not easy.
You know what, too, Bud? It's like, what's good is just a reminder. I'm sitting here thinking this for myself. As pastors, we've got to remember, man, this church is not my church.
Yep.
Like we are literally just the next pastor. I mean, it's like there's going to be a pastor after us, and this church is going to be there. And it's almost like, what if we approached that and really believed that I'm here to serve God's people. I'm here to help lead them the best I can and to help set them up for what's next. I think sometimes we make an idol out of the church or out of our job to the point that it affects our leadership and being able to pass that baton well. And so anyway, I'm just thinking of the guy who's hearing that and going, that's me.
Well, it's that same question in Joshua 5 the pastor has to ask, right?
Yeah. Yep.
He can't ask, Lord, are you for me being the pastor or against me being the pastor? He has to ask, Lord, what would you have me do?
What would you have me do?
What does that look like?
And there are cases where God has taken the one individual, that pastor, and transformed him. And
I know of some,
he becomes the leader.
Totally, me too.
But that's
But
not.
it's not without some
common.
sort of it's not without some sort of moment of serious renewal.
And it's not common.
No, it's not.
And so most of the time, it is a new pastor who does that. All right. So we are now number 5, going up the list from 1 to 8.
Okay, here we go. You ready?
Yep.
Let's just
Number
review
4.
to help us out. I think
8,
we're at
7,
4.
6, 5,
Number
4.
8
We're on
is
4.
admission of a problem and a need.
Yep,
Okay,
right.
7 is humility, a
Yep.
posture of humility. 6 is a willingness to do things differently, sometimes radically differently. Number 5 is new leadership or renewed leadership. And now number 4...
It's a renewed focus on the community, and this is right down my lane. I believe if you're going to revitalize and replant a church, no need to do it if you're just going to try to be a regional church and attract people to come there from outside your region.
Yep.
You're going to live or die by how many people you lead to Christ and disciple within your own neighborhood. Your
Hold
own
on,
community.
say that again, pal.
You're going to live
That
or
was good.
die by how many people you lead to Christ and disciple within your own neighborhood.
Amen.
I mean, your passion ought to be, depending on how densely populated your community is, whether it's a mile from you or 3 miles from you. You know, we were running about 18 or 20 at Warnell. I want to know, how far do I have to go to find 2,000 people? Well, I could go like half a mile from my church, and they'd be two. Okay, that was my first mission field. But basically, if we're 20 people, how far do I got to go to get to 2,000? And let's just try to knock on every door and minister as much as we can to that 2,000, and then we'll keep moving out. But that's got to be our target. That's got to be they're there. Your church's address is no accident. And so, serving your community, loving your community, embracing your community, not trying to grow your church, but trying to love your community. Realized churches begin to love their community with greater fervency. Rainer says they seek to become a vital part of that community rather than an island isolated from the community. A recently revitalized church now has a 1-minute community focus as a regular part of their worship service, where every Sunday you're thinking about the community. And my passion was at Warnell, how many people could walk to church if they needed to? I want a church where people can walk. I'll never forget, we needed to put a bike rack in front of our church because we had families riding their bikes to church.
Cool. That's
cool. That is really cool.
Okay, number three, members praying for revitalization.
Yeah.
We've
Members
talked about
praying
this
for
so
us.
often.
Yeah.
Prayer is the work. We don't do the prayer and then work for the Lord. Prayer is the work. And true revitalization is never human power. It's totally dependence on God.
Yep.
And it's evidenced by the increased prayer and fervency of that prayer. And many times, and even our church at Warnell and at Linwood, we can look specifically to prayer groups in that church that became the fuel for true revitalization. So rather than focusing on changing the name and changing the logo and changing the music and changing all that, again, focus on the fervent revitalization of prayer within the lives of your people and let God do something really that only He can do.
I love that.
All right, number 2, change in membership attitudes from selfish to selfless.
Yeah, so the church is all about me, and membership has its privileges, and it's all about what church can do for me and how much this church will do for me and how much I've done for this church, and that we need to shift from that to how much can I give away, how much can I serve, how much can I love other people through this church. There's got to be a huge shift because so many of our churches are locked into that thing of, well, this is my church and I've been here for all these years and I deserve this and you need to listen to me and my voice matters. And frankly, guys, I wish I could say I haven't heard this, but I've heard it so many times from older, mature Christians, people who've been believers for decades have said to me, and I'm not making this up, don't forget who pays the bills around here. They say that all the time. And I understand that they give disproportionately to the ministry of the church. I get that. But they do not pay the bills around here. The Lord pays the bills around here. They don't. He doesn't need their money. And the fact that they believe they pay the bills, then they feel like they're entitled to something. And that whole entitlement attitude is selfish, and God will not honor it. And it has to go away if there's going to be any kind of true revitalization.
Okay, we're down to the last one. You ready for this?
Number one
reason
churches need to be revitalized. The number one thing that revitalizes a church is
a focus on evangelism.
Say it again.
A focus on evangelism.
I'm trying my best to make this exciting.
No, it was great.
You're doing good.
I was great. I was thinking you might pull a little
I could have. I should have.
But a focus on evangelism.
Yes.
We got to reach the lost, man. What are we doing?
Well,
Why are we here?
Well, because for decades, because we were a Southern Baptist church in a particular neighborhood, there were just certain culture. We had the wind at our back, and there was a cultural bias toward going to church. And we would pick up people from other churches that would move there and join there. Well, I called it low-hanging evangelical fruit.
Yeah.
Well, there's not much low-hanging evangelical fruit anymore. And let me just give you guys a heads up. If there is any, they're probably not going to your church.
Yeah.
They're going to go to one of the bigger churches in town. People aren't going to visit every single Baptist church in your community. When they move in there and they're looking for a church, they're probably going to go to one of the larger churches, and that larger church is probably going to provide about everything they need. So why they need to come down to your church where you're going to put them to work and you don't have the, they're not. And so churches, so many times, guys, I've worked so much with so many churches that used to be 300 and 400 and now they're 30 or 40 because in the 1950s and 60s, they just grew because the culture was kind of pointing people to go to a church.
Yeah.
And it was positive.
Yes.
In fact, back in the days, Sunday school was always larger than worship, always. In fact, back in the 70s and 80s and 60s, when churches reported their numbers of attendance, they always reported Sunday school. We didn't report worship because Sunday school was always higher. Why was Sunday school higher? Because in those years, people would bring their kids to Sunday school, drop them off, and then pick them up. They didn't come to church with their kids, but they wanted their kids in Sunday school. Those days are gone. You know that. And so the dying, declining church in a neighborhood, you will only exist to the degree that you lead people to Christ and disciple them. You're not going to exist by bringing church members from other churches. You're not going to exist by being a regional church. Only by evangelism. And that's
good.
great because that's what Jesus wants us to do.
Amen. That's right.
So go back. Here we go. Again, we're going to go down in order. Here we go. These are, and we'll put them on the show notes, but these are the things that have to take place for a church to engage in revitalization. Number 8.
An admission of a problem and a need.
Number 7.
Humility.
Number 6. A willingness to do things differently. Number 5.
New leadership or renewed leadership.
Number 4.
Renewed focus on the community.
Number 3. Membership praying for revitalization. Number 2.
Change in membership attitudes from selfish to selfless.
And number 1.
A focus on evangelism.
We did that
There
really
it is.
well.
Yeah,
But
we did.
That was impressive, Clifton.
The way I did that?
Yeah,
I know. I
Well
stayed
done.
up all night working on that, actually.
Hey, you should stay up all night subscribing and
right.
following this podcast.
And
2
get-
episodes
that's
every
right.
week.
And take your wife's phone or your husband's phone and subscribe
And go
on
and
it
do it
too.
there, too.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, it's 2 subscribes, right?
Yeah.
We need them desperately.
Take one and just, start a playlist of all the episodes and just let it run
do.
somewhere in the other room.
I do. I have such low self-esteem that I look up every day how many people have subscribed to this episode. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant. This podcast is brought to you by the North American Mission Board, where we help dying or struggling churches regain health for the glory of God and the good of their communities. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. To learn more about becoming a replanting pastor or to explore resources about revitalization for your own church, visit churchreplanters.com.